This movie always makes me wonder what an Edgar Wright-directed Bond film would look like. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today, I'm going to be talking about the 2014 action spy comedy, Kingsman: The Secret Service. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, ranked lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Kingsman: The Secret Service stars Taron Egerton, Colin Firth, and Samuel L. Jackson, and was directed by Matthew Vaughan. Based on the comic of the same name, it tells the story of Eggsy, played by Taron Egerton, who's recruited into the secret spy organization, the Kingsman, and must stop a tech genius's evil plan. Spy comedies are certainly nothing new. We've had plenty over the last 10 years or so, but I would argue that the majority of them are comedy first, spy plot second. And of course, we've got plenty of other spy comedies from past decades, like the Austin Powers trilogy or even the 1967 Casino Royale, but the majority of those films were parodies or spoofs, so again, comedy first. And so at first glance, it'd be easy to lump Kingsman into this comedy-forward group, because it's definitely got a lot of humor. But it's also very much a spy origin story, as well as a surprisingly brutal action thriller, so it's actually this fairly well-balanced blend of all three genres. This is a movie that I actually missed out on seeing in the theater, and I still regret that. In fact, I didn't get around to first watching my Blu-ray copy until early 2016, which is crazy because I figured I was gonna like this movie, so I don't really know why I put it off for so long. I've seen it quite a few times since, but I've gotta say, this rewatch was especially interesting, because I just wrapped up my Bond franchise rewatch. So I've still got Bond on the brain, and I was impressed by just how much this movie pays respect and homage to that franchise. This isn't a parody or a spoof, so it's not making fun of Bond, but it's not trying to copy it either, or be a knockoff. It's just very much rooted in the idea of Bond. Classic Bond, especially the Connery and Moore eras, are the clear reference point here, and this movie makes direct reference to that fact in a way that's slightly meta, because the characters know about spy movies like James Bond, and there's a whole scene where two characters are discussing how tonally different the earlier Bond movies are compared to the more serious later films. And after that, Bond comparisons are repeatedly made to the situation at hand, but even beyond the direct dialogue references, there are a ton of Bond homages here. An eccentric villain, a formidable henchwoman, the score, fun gadgets, including blade shoes like in From Russia with Love, and a single martini reference. Even the ending is a nod to the usual classic Bond film ending, albeit a little more overt than usual. So there are definitely a lot of Bond references, but luckily they don't feel forced, so they won't even register as references to somebody who doesn't get them, which still allows Kingsman to stand on its own, and it does so remarkably well, especially considering how many spy movies we've had. One of the things I enjoy the most here is the world building. We're not dealing with an existing spy organization, and we're introduced to it through the eyes of a newcomer. So every time Eggsy sees something new and cool and is amazed by it, we are too. It's been done in a lot of movies, but I always really enjoy the whole secret world within a world thing, so the premise that this Kingsman organization has existed and operated for decades without anybody in the general public knowing is just cool to me. Using a tailor shop as the front and main headquarters, driving around in seemingly ordinary taxis. Even the whole recruitment and training process was interesting to watch, because we've never gotten that much of an origin story from a Bond-like movie before. We've touched a little bit on the comedy, a little bit on the spy side of things, so that leaves the action. And I have to say, this movie has such entertaining action. It gets a little over the top at points, and I'm sure some would argue it's gratuitous at other points, but I just have so much fun watching these action sequences. They're edited in a very playful and energetic way, but they're frequently quite violent and brutal. But it's all very stylized action, really tapping into the comic book origins of the story. If you've seen Matthew Vaughn's previous film, Kick-Ass, you'll have a pretty good sense of the way the action's presented here. I really love the fight choreography. Again, it's very stylized and heavily edited, and so it doesn't have quite the grounded believability that a John Wick or Atomic Blonde fight would have, but it's still impressive to watch. So I've talked about the story and style, but I'd be remiss not to mention the cast. The Kingsman side of things is especially impressive. First off, we've got Taron Egerton as our young protagonist, Eggsy. It's crazy to think about it now, considering he's become a bit of a big-name actor, but this was actually Egerton's first leading role, and only his second feature film. But he does remarkably well here, and really fit this character. Similarly, Colin Firth as his spy mentor is perfectly cast. He's able to bring this seriousness and dark humor to the role at the same time, and I totally buy him as a gentlemanly spy. I'm less impressed by the villain side, unfortunately. I think Samuel L. Jackson can play a good villain, and I get that Valentine is supposed to be similar to an eccentric classic Bond villain, but he's just a tad too quirky, and I think he's probably my least favorite part of the movie. Luckily, his blade-footed henchwoman, Gazelle, makes up for it a bit. She's totally ridiculous, but is a really cool homage combination of a number of over-the-top Bond villain henchmen, including Jaws, Mayday, and even Bambi and Thumper. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one has gotta be the action. I just find it so enjoyable and fun to watch. To be honest, I usually don't like over-stylized action all that much, but it really works here. It certainly pulls from its comic book origins in this regard, but it also feels like the action in a spy thriller. Again, this film takes a playful and fun approach to the genre, so rather than being overly grounded and grittily serious like the Bond movies of today, it embraces some of the ridiculousness of classic Bond, and adds a modern, brutal action twist to it. Say what you will about the gratuitousness of this movie's now infamous church scene, but the combination of fight choreography, brutal stylized action, and editing make for an action sequence that's almost mesmerizing in its flow. The second pro is the world building. Unless you've read the comics, this film acts as our introduction to the world of the Kingsman, and man is it interesting. The concept of a secret society or of an underground spy organization isn't anything new or particularly unique, but the way this movie presents it to us is just really engaging. Since we follow Eggsy through the recruitment process, we get to see the inner workings of the agency. In most of the Bond films, for example, we usually tag along with Bond, even though he typically has more insider information than we do. Sometimes we get to see some exposition scenes with Q or M, but it's clear that those scenes are usually more for us than they are for Bond. Here, though, those same types of exposition-heavy moments don't really feel like the exposition that they actually are, because it's all part of the world building seen through Eggsy's eyes. We're just along for the ride with him as he experiences all these new things. On the con side, my only real issue is the villain. And I gotta say, every time I watch this movie, I'm a little more torn on this point. Because I think the things that I dislike about Valentine and his villainous scheme were all intended. And watching this movie so close to rewatching all the Bonds only furthers this idea for me. Valentine is meant to be an over-the-top eccentric villain. He's a modern-day Max Zorin, or Goldfinger, or even Elliot Carver. So he's meant to be weirdly eccentric, with an over-the-top, ridiculous take-over-the-world plan. And so I think I actually liked him a bit more this time than I ever have in the past. But he's still just a little too much, and kind of sticks out when compared to the tone of the rest of the film. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying any of the films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm going to give Kingsman: The Secret Service 4 out of 5 paws. While certainly a bit derivative of James Bond and other spy films, this movie is such an enjoyable and fun blend of espionage, action, and comedy. I would recommend Kingsman: The Secret Service to anybody who likes spy movies or action comedies. This whole film feels like a non-spoof tribute to classic Bond, with a heavy dose of modern action and humor thrown in. Bond fans will appreciate the multitude of references and nods to the 007 franchise, and fans of modern action comedies will get their fix of brutal and entertaining action sequences, not to mention a smattering of dark and raunchy humor. If you liked Kingsman: The Secret Service, I would recommend Kingsman: The Golden Circle. While I don't think the sequel is anywhere near as good as this first film, it does offer another somewhat fun over-the-top villain scheme, an expansion on the world building, and the next chapter of Eggsy's time as a Kingsman. If you really like the general style and the action sequences, you've gotta watch Kick-Ass, which was director Matthew Vaughn's take on a superhero movie. And since this film so heavily references the Bond franchise, I I gotta recommend the 10th Bond film, The Spy Who Loved Me. Any number of 007 movies could have fit the bill, but this one stars Roger Moore, the most comedic of the James Bond actors, and features a thematically similar villain plot, a memorably metal-augmented henchman, and plenty of gadgets in action. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Kingsman: The Secret Service? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite spy comedy? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe or add it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.